Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Long Distance Work Life, the podcast designed to help you thrive, survive, generally keep the weasels at bay as we navigate the world of remote work, hybrid work, and how the workplace is changing. Today, we have a very different kind of show. Ordinarily, if it's Marisa and I, we chat and discuss a topic. Otherwise, I interview guests. But today, because we are talking about a very special book that Marisa will tell you about, I am playing the role of hotshot author, or at least co-hotshot author, with our friend and boss and colleague, Kevin Eikenberry, and we will be discussing the second edition, newly revised version of The Long Distance Leader, revised rules for remarkable remote and hybrid leadership. And I got that out the first time. Yay. But Marisa, you are playing interviewer today. So you are running the show, lady.
Thank you, Wayne. And so as Wayne already said, we're going to talk about the second edition of The Long Distance Leader, which was written by Kevin and Wayne. And it's a book that's been a cornerstone for remote leaders since its first release in May of 2018. And so much of the world has already changed as far as leadership and remote work. And so we're going to dive into what's new in this second edition and how leaders can navigate the evolving challenges of leading from a distance. So Kevin, thank you for joining Wayne and I today.
I'm glad to be here. This is, I think this is only the second time I've been on the show. So
yeah, second or third. So we're excited to have you back. And I hope that our listeners are excited as well. So one of the things that I want to start off with first, so as we already said, the book came out in 2018. So much of the world has changed since then. So what are some of the biggest shifts that you've observed since the rise of remote work?
Biggest shifts, I think that I'll just say this. I think that we are in the middle of living in a time where time has been compressed. And here's what I mean. Like, the nature of the workplace usually changes and takes like 50, 60, 70 years for that sort of adjustment to sort of filter through, being tested, being tried, being sort of acclimated, the society being acclimated to it. And in this one, it largely happened in like 8 weeks and then over 2 years. And so what I think all of the changes, all the challenges, all the frustrations, all of the stuff that you guys talk about here on a regular basis are in part because we're living in this very compressed time of change that we've not ever experienced in the workplace. We could go back and talk about since the Industrial Revolution and all that sort of stuff. But that's, to me, the most fascinating thing about all this. Like, human dynamics show up, people's wants and needs show up, and their tendencies around change show up. And it's all because of that, to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked on this show before, to your point about 8 weeks. It's like Zoom went from a what is that to a verb.
It really
and
did.
then from a verb to a syndrome.
Right. Yeah. Zoom fatigue and all that.
Yeah, I think Kevin's absolutely right. The kind of seismic change. And yet, what is both interesting and frustrating is how little it has changed.
Right.
Some of that is because the change was already underway when the kind of crossing the Rubicon moment happened. And the other thing is, I think there's this desperate attempt to go back to the before times, so we're not really embracing what's changed and launching from that point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the key.
And so
thing. It's that tension between the future and so many things are pulling us forward, and yet so many of us, and I'll say us, are holding us back with the way it used to be and the good old days and why can't we all be in the office and 100 other things like that, right? It's that tension that's where this is so interesting and really where so much of the conversation ends up lying, I think.
Well, and, just a second ago, I mentioned, Zoom went to a verb. And when you guys wrote the book, tools like Zoom and even Microsoft Teams didn't exist yet. So how have those communication tools transformed the way that we work?
I think that it's transformed in two ways. One is it's normalized them. I mean, when the book first came out, one of the big lessons was use your webcam. Well, now, people understand it's not going to steal your soul, and everybody, including your grandmother, has been on a Zoom call and they know kind of what that's about. So I think, the novelty of the technology. The other thing is that and I'm going to give you a very quick analogy. When I started my consultancy 18 years ago, there were 120 web meeting platforms out there. Everybody was inventing a new one all the time. And then it kind of collapsed into the top 5, right? There's WebEx, and there was Skype for Business and whatever. And now we have gone through another one of those collapsing, where at the beginning of the pandemic, there were 1,000 tools out there, and people said enough already. It's not that we don't love technology, it's that we've got work to do. And they were kind of looking for one ring to rule them all. And so we've settled into, there's kind of the Google universe, there's the Slack Zoom universe, and there's Microsoft Teams. And you can argue whether Teams was designed by Sauron or not. But at the end of the day, people are looking for ways to get the work done with as little drama and panic about technology as possible.
Right, and drag. Can I just make a comment? And this will probably take us off track from what you're planning, Marisa. But
okay.
that webcam comment that Wayne made is exactly right. And yet, here's this tension. And yet, when I'm with groups regularly, I still have people saying, do we really have to use our webcams? Like, so everyone now has used them. And yet, in some ways, the message that we had in 2018, Wayne, hasn't completely changed, because the reasons they don't want to may be different, right? The reason they may not want to use it might not be the same. That it's stealing their soul, seeing my living room, all that stuff. But the fact that some people don't want to be on them is still there, and that's one of those tensions, right? Like the drag on it, the ease of doing it, all that's gotten better, and yet we're not all really there. It's just a small example of what we were talking about earlier.
Speaking of all of that kind of stuff too, so like, one of the things that you guys have added into this new edition of the book is a lot of discussion about hybrid. And so what are some of the unique challenges and opportunities that hybrid work presents compared to a fully remote or a fully in-office setup?
Well, I think the single biggest thing, and it's really not rocket science, the single biggest thing to me is that if we're going to have a hybrid workplace where some or all of the people are going to be in the office some of the time, then we ought to use those days as appropriate. And so what I always say is, not every work day should be the same. The days you go to the office ought to be different kinds of days. More likely you're going to collaborate, you have those serendipitous conversations. That's the chance to work with a mentor. That's the chance to do side-by-side training. Like, we ought to make sure that we're taking advantage of those days, and then releasing people when they're back home to get have more productivity with fewer meetings, et cetera. So to me, that's the single biggest thing that's relatively easy to implement, and yet I'm still seeing most organizations not doing that very well.
Well, and part of that, I think, is because they're looking at going back to the office as, okay, we are now primarily in the office again, and the people who are working remotely are outliers, or they will adjust because we're in the office. What's, I think, one of those seismic changes that Kevin was referring to earlier is that companies that are starting now are much more comfortable with the remote workplace and trying less to cram it into the old model than companies where the boat's already in the water and you're dealing with memories of before time and sunk costs and all kinds of things. So that's another one of the changes, is that if I'm starting a company and I don't need a big office and I don't need to be in the office all the time, cool. But if I've already got that infrastructure,
well, I'm already paying for it, Wayne, right?
Well, it goes back to a conversation we've had before about remote first versus remote friendly and how they're very, very different.
Well, and one of the challenges with that is that there's a tendency for leaders to fall back into old habits. And so there are some pitfalls with hybrid work, primarily being proximity bias, that, it's really easy to look across the room and see somebody, so they get involved in the conversation and somebody gets excluded, not intentionally. I'm not, not including somebody. It just doesn't happen naturally. And so that dynamic needs to be navigated.
Well, and then we think everybody knows whatever the thing is, and yet, oh, well, we didn't. No one sent an email or a Slack message or put something in the Teams channel. So the everybody that knows are those that are here. I mean, we used to have that once in a while when someone was homesick or on vacation, right? But that just happens way, way, way more often now. And again, not intentional, just happens. We've got to be, one of the messages from the first version of the book and still in there is that word of being intentional, like making conscious choices. Stepping back from our routines and our habits, from the auto response to doing what is the best thing given the situation.
Well, and Wayne, you just mentioned a minute ago about companies that are starting now are more comfortable with remote work. And so, how should organizations approach hybrid work differently, whether they're an established team or they're newly forming?
I am like a dog with a sock on this particular topic. I think you have to be very careful about using the word hybrid. Are you, in fact, doing hybrid work, or are you doing, remote friendly work with the focus in the office? A hybrid, if we're going to be really technical and semantic about it, a hybrid is two things coming together to create a third entity. A mule is a horse and a donkey, but as an old farm boy, a mule is a mule. I mean, it is its own thing. And I think over time, we are going to develop this third way of working, this hybrid work that is not only who works where, but the element of time gets folded in. So it's what work gets done where and when that work gets done. And the balance between synchronous and asynchronous is going to be very different.
I think that's huge. And I think, Wayne, in the first book, we used the word hybrid. And I wish that everybody on the internet would say, "Oh, these guys created that phrase for the hybrid team," which no, we can't say. But when we use that word, that's what we meant, even in 2018, right? And I think it's not always meaning that, but ultimately that's what it needs to mean. And organizations that figure out how to do it that way, if that's the way they want to do work, will have a competitive advantage.
So, Kevin, you've had the Kevin Eikenberry group for over 30 years, and we've been a hybrid team for a very, very long time. And so, if you were starting a business today, if you were starting this business today, what would you do differently than you did when you started?
Well, what I would do different than when I started is different than what I would do knowing what I know now, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I think that in terms of how I hired, where I looked for the hiring pool, I don't think it would change much. Like, I think that, I do have a separate building that's where I'm sitting right now that, Marisa, you come to 2 days a week, but only if I'm here. Right. And I think there would still be a place. It would be like it is, and wouldn't house everybody, because not everyone would be houseable because they're all across the country. I'm not sure. I mean, there's lots of things that we could do different about our business, but in terms of how it's set up, I'm not sure I would change that much, because I think that what we have not only works for us, but we're generally, while there's always room for improvement, we're relatively productive. There's good relationships. We're able to collaborate, and I don't think that having us all in the same place, or even less so, would make any difference.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
You know what? I'm going to mildly contradict that.
Okay.
When I joined the group, I lived in Chicago. Most of the people were there, and we communicated a little bit differently. We got together more often. We spoke more often. I think because the longevity of the people on our team has been there for a while. Kevin's comfort level as the boss with letting people get their work done and trusting that we will come to him proactively if there's something that needs to be addressed. I think the way and the comfort level with that is different than it was even a few years ago, as the decision was made, we're not going to focus on hiring people in Indianapolis. We're not going to.
Right. So I'm not disagreeing with you.
I think Kevin's comfort level and skill level.
Yeah, I won't disagree with that either. And yet I think if the question is about being willing to bring people from different places, I think part of the reason we write the book, The Long Distance Leader, and why we write a second edition of it is to help people continue to build those skills, right? And I think that that's the question we get asked a lot now, Marisa, is, okay, why a second version of the book? And people say, well, yeah, we get it that the world is different, but do we still need this book? Because many of us have been doing this for 2 or 3 years. I said, well, we've all needed more leadership training, even though we've been leading for longer than that. And I think a lot of people haven't really locked into some of these things that maybe they know because they've done it for a few years. And I think the idea of this book is in part to not only show us what's different and changing, but also what we need to make sure we're really doing well, that I'm pretty confident not all leaders of remote hybrid distributed teams are doing.
So for people who are reading the book, or, once they do read the book, what are some actionable steps that they can take both organizationally or even professionally after reading?
Okay, here's a short answer, and then I'll let you go, Wayne. The short answer is, don't just read it, do something. Like, you will determine when you read it what those most actionable steps are. And I think we've written a book that is actionable and that gives you very specific things that you can go do. In fact, every chapter gives you some examples. But the point that I'm making is that the best thing you can do is go take action on whatever those most important things are to you, because it'd be a bit presumptuous for Wayne and I to determine which things those would be for an individual leader.
I just think that, the most dangerous thing is to think you've got it all figured out. And one of the challenges that we're hearing from our clients is, we know that people could use a little help, but we've done remote, right? We did remote training during COVID. People know what they're doing now. And we never entirely know what we're doing. And there's some backsliding, and there's some things that we thought people knew that they're not doing. And so maintaining that skill development is really important. And I know that sounds self-serving since that's the business we're in, but it also happens to be true.
Yeah, there's a difference between knowing something and doing something, right? And there's a big gap there a lot of the times. And so that I think Wayne and I are coming to that same point. Like, if your organization did some training on remote, that's fine, that's great. But the question is, how is it going now? And if it's not going in the ways you'd like it to go, or you think it could be better, then I'm confident you'll find nuggets in this book, in the second edition of this book, that would help you as a leader, but also help the leaders in your organization.
So we've gone from leader to teammate to team. Kevin, what's next for you in the world of remote and hybrid work? What's the next thing that you're focusing on?
Well, I'm writing a new book that's not specifically about that, but it is about the future of work in some ways. It comes out next March, and maybe I can convince you guys to have me on to talk about the flexible leader or flexible leadership when that time comes down the road. So, but it's not specifically or solely about remote. The word remote doesn't show up or hybrid doesn't show up in the title, but certainly there are hat tips and conversations about not only what we've been going through as lessons, but also what we do moving forward as well.
That's great. And Wayne, I know that hybrid work has been something that you've been talking about a lot. You mentioned the mule versus, donkey earlier. So what are some aspects with hybrid that you're obsessed with exploring right now?
I think it's that being intentional about the balance of synchronous and asynchronous work. My favorite example is we've all walked into meetings and had to sit there while, all the preamble and context is created. Well, we could do a lot of that beforehand. And then the meeting happens, and then we've all walked out of meetings, and halfway down the hall, we've gone, oh man, you know what I should have said?
Right.
And so there is getting together and collaboration time, and then there's thinking and planning time on both ends, which can make way better use of our time and result in better outcomes. And so it's, what does that hybrid work look like, and how do we get better, smarter, faster about it, is kind of where my brain is at.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to do some episodes about that in the future. And before we wrap up, I have one last question. So, other than the pandemic, which obviously changed a lot of things about remote and hybrid work, what is one surprising change in remote work that you didn't anticipate?
It's who wants remote work. One of the things that the numbers are showing is people thought that the youngsters wouldn't want to go to the office and they all want to stay home and, do their work between playing video games. No, young people want to go to the office. They're early in their career. They're more socially programmed. They want to learn and soak up the knowledge and the culture of the company. The people that are most demanding remote work are middle managers, people in the middle of their career who know how to do their job and they just want to do it. And they want to do it in the way that they can do it best. They want some flexibility in their time. So some of the assumptions about who was going to want to work remotely have not proven to be the way we thought they were.
I think the thing, part of I think I shared part of my answer earlier with this whole compacting of the timeline. But I will say that I think that it's been a bit surprising, and I think generally hopeful and helpful that we've added in a whole other conversation, not just about the where and the when of work, but the why of work, which is people wanting to have a better sense of why they're there and finding meaning in their work and how they hook work to life, right? Which has been messy for a long time, got messier when people were working from the place that they live. But I think the ongoing conversation about all of that, I think is generally healthy, and we need to keep thinking about it as individuals for ourselves, but also as leaders in organizations.
Kevin, I know that, when this episode comes out, we're about to have virtual LeaderCon. Do you want to talk a little bit about that before we wrap up?
Yeah, I can, just very quickly. So, back at the start of the pandemic, I had this harebrained idea that we should, when no one was doing any training, I couldn't get away, couldn't do that. So we created this thing we called Virtual LeaderCon, and we've continued to do it. It's evolved somewhat, but on September 17th through 19th, we're doing 2.5 days where we will have a bunch of experts join me on a virtual platform that allows for lots of participation and engagement. And we're going to bring those leaders in, those thought leaders in, to have conversations with our participants from around the world to talk about what matters. And I think the thing that makes it different than a podcast or a webinar or those kinds of things is that the direction of the conversation is guided much by the people that are there. So we'd love to have you join us. It's completely free, virtualleadercon.com. And I think the thing that specifically relates to this show is that first half day on September the 17th, Wayne will be joining me at the beginning, and at the end we'll be doing a Q&A, but we'll have 3 guests, and that whole session will be about the future of work, hybrid work, and all those sorts of things. So if you're listening to this show, you definitely want to join us that half day, virtualleadercon.com. And if you decide you wanted to have the recordings and transcripts of those sessions, you can get them for free if you pre-order a book. And I know that's where you're headed, is to talk about the book.
That is where
I'll let you do that. I hope that we'll have you all join us at Virtual LeaderCon, and thanks you guys for having me on the show.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. And Wayne, as always, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. And before we go, as we've already been discussing, the second edition of the Long Distance Leader is available for pre-order and will be launching on September 17th, as we just talked about a minute ago. And this updated guide is perfect for navigating today's remote and hybrid work environments. With new principles and proven strategies, Kevin and Wayne show you how to lead effectively no matter where your team is located. Don't miss out on the latest insights and exercises designed to boost productivity and morale. Pre-order your copy now at longdistanceworklife.com/LDL and strengthen your remote leadership skills today. And listeners, thank you so much for listening to the Long Distance Work Life. For show notes, transcripts, and other resources, make sure to visit longdistanceworklife.com. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the show so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you're on Apple or Spotify, please give us a rating and review. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more listeners just like you. Feel free to contact us via email or LinkedIn with the links in our show notes. And let us know that you listen to this episode or suggest a topic for Wayne and I to tackle in a future episode. We would love to hear from you. And thanks for joining us. And as Wayne likes to say, don't let the weasels get you down.